Cut it down or we'll cut it down for you. That's what the HOA president told me, standing in my driveway with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wanted my 100-year-old oak tree gone. She said it was dangerous. She said it was a liability. What she didn't know was that in 6 days, a man with an arborist's license and 31 years of experience would tell her to her face that she was wrong, and that report would end her career on the board. I'm Sarah Coleman, 34 years old, married to Mark, mother of 2 boys who spent every summer afternoon climbing the same oak tree that would become the center of a war I never asked for. We live on Birchwood Lane in a neighborhood called Maple Ridge Estates, the kind of place with matching mailboxes, identical shutter colors, and a homeowners association that took itself far too seriously. We moved in 4 years ago. Mark and I fell in love with the house because of that tree. It was already 40 feet tall when the house was built in 1987, a red oak the original owners had refused to remove even when the developer wanted a clean lot. It shaded our whole front yard in summer, dropped acorns our boys collected in mason jars, and held a tire swing that had already outlasted 3 different tires. For 3 years, nobody said a word about it. Then in March, Diane Whitfield became HOA president. Diane was the kind of woman who measured grass height with an actual ruler. She sent a written warning to the Petersons 2 doors down because their trash cans were visible from the street 4 hours past pickup. She fined a retired veteran $80 because his flagpole was 6 inches taller than the association's bylaws allowed. Half the neighborhood was terrified of her clipboard. The other half just paid whatever fine showed up and moved on. I should have known our turn was coming. I just didn't expect it to start with a tree that had stood in that yard longer than Diane had been alive. Our street was the kind you'd put on a postcard for suburban America, sprinklers ticking on at 6 a.m. A mail carrier who knew every dog's name, kids racing bikes down the same stretch of sidewalk every evening until the streetlights came on. Mark worked from home 3 days a week, which meant he was usually the one who saw Diane coming before I did, usually with enough warning to mutter, "Incoming," from the kitchen window. It started on a Tuesday morning in April. I was making coffee when I saw her standing at the edge of our lawn, phone raised, taking pictures of the oak like it was a crime scene. I opened the front door. "Can I help you, Diane?" She didn't lower the phone. "This tree is a hazard, Sarah." I've had 3 residents complain about branches hanging over the sidewalk. 3 residents, I later found out it was one, Diane herself, filing under 3 different section numbers of the same complaint form. "It's a 100-year-old red oak," I said. "It's healthy, it's been fine for decades." "Inspected by who?" she asked, already writing something on her clipboard. I didn't have an answer for that. Nobody had ever formally inspected it. It was just always there, always fine. 5 days later, an envelope showed up in our mailbox. Official HOA letterhead. Violation notice, section 14. 3. Trees and vegetation posing safety or structural risk to common areas or neighboring properties. I had 30 days to remove the tree or face a fine of $200 a week, compounding until compliance. $200 a week for a tree. Mark read the letter twice before he said anything. "This can't be legal," he said. "She can't just decide a 100-year-old tree is dangerous because she doesn't like it." I called the HOA management office the next morning. The woman on the phone, a tired-sounding assistant named Renee, told me Diane had authority under the Safety and Structural Risk Clause to issue violations without a professional assessment. The burden of proof technically sat with us to disprove the claim. That detail should have made me angry. Instead, it made me curious. If the burden of proof was on us, then all we needed was proof. I started asking around the neighborhood. Turned out I wasn't the only target. The Hendersons had gotten a violation for a maple Diane called unsightly. An elderly couple on Cedarwood Court had been told to remove a 50-year-old pine because it didn't match the aesthetic standards of the community, a phrase that appeared nowhere in the actual bylaws. Diane wasn't enforcing safety. She was enforcing preference. And she was using the word dangerous as a weapon because nobody had ever challenged it. I pulled our HOA's governing documents that night, all 90-something pages of them, and read section 14. 3 word for word at the kitchen table while Mark did the dishes. Buried near the bottom, in smaller print than the rest, was a line I'd never noticed before. Any determination of structural or safety risk must be supported by assessment from a credentialed arborist or licensed structural engineer. Diane had never mentioned that line. I wondered if she'd ever read it either. At the next HOA meeting, I decided to ask directly. 20-some neighbors packed into the clubhouse, folding chairs squeaking on linoleum. When public comment opened, I stood up. "Diane, can you tell me what qualification you used to determine my oak tree is a safety hazard?" The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when everyone already knows the answer is going to be uncomfortable. I've lived here 19 years, she said. I know what a healthy tree looks like. That's not a qualification, I said. That's an opinion. She smiled the way people smile when they're furious and trying not to show it. The board has the authority to act in the interest of community safety, Sarah. I'd suggest you comply before this gets more expensive for you. Somebody in the back row laughed not at me at her, and Diane's jaw tightened. She adjourned the meeting 11 minutes early. Walking to the car, Mark squeezed my hand. She's not going to back down, he said. Neither am I said. But even as I said it, I didn't yet know how right I'd turn out to be or how badly Diane had underestimated exactly who she was picking a fight with. The second letter arrived 12 days later, and this one didn't waste time with warnings. It was a formal notice of noncompliance, listing the fine as already active $1,400, backdated to the original 30-day deadline, with an additional $200 accruing every week the tree remained standing. Attached was a lien notice. If we didn't pay, the HOA had the legal right to place a lien against our house. A lien, against our home, over a tree Diane had never once had professionally examined. Mark wanted to call a lawyer immediately. I agreed, but before we spent $1 on legal fees, I wanted something concrete, something Diane couldn't argue with, couldn't spin, couldn't dismiss with a clipboard and a confident voice. I called a certified arborist. His name was Tom Reyes, and he'd been assessing trees professionally for 31 years, certified through the International Society of Arboriculture, which, as it turned out, was the exact credentialing body referenced, buried in a footnote, in our HOA's own governing documents as the standard for tree risk assessments. Diane had never read that footnote. I doubt she knew it existed. Tom came out on a Thursday afternoon. He walked the yard slowly, running his hand along the bark, checking the root flare at the base, tapping sections of the trunk with a small mallet to listen for hollow spots that might indicate internal decay. He photographed the canopy from 4 angles. He checked for fungal growth. Dead limbs included bark and soil compaction. It took him 90 minutes. This tree, he told me, closing his notebook, is one of the healthiest mature red oaks I've assessed in this county in the last 5 years. I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. I'll have the full written report to you by Monday, he said, certified, signed, and ready to submit anywhere you need it. Before he left, Tom pointed up at the tire swing rope, worn smooth from years of small hands. Whoever's been maintaining this tree over the decades did it right, he said. Proper pruning, cuts, no topping, no damage to the collar. Somebody loved this tree long before you did. It was such a small comment, but it stuck with me for days. That same week, while we waited for the report, Diane escalated again, this time publicly. She sent a mass email to the entire HOA distribution list, 62 households, naming our address directly and calling our refusal to address a known safety hazard a danger to the entire community's well-being and property values. She copied the property management company. She copied 2 board members. She did not copy us. A neighbor forwarded it to me within the hour, along with a message that just said, "This woman has completely lost it." Reading my own address in an email accusing me of endangering my neighbors, sent to 62 strangers without a single phone call first, was the moment something shifted in me. This wasn't about a tree anymore. This was about a woman who had confused her clipboard for a badge and who was about to learn the difference between authority and accuracy. Monday morning, Tom's report arrived, 14 pages, certified letterhead. A risk rating of low, the lowest category on the assessment scale, with a section specifically addressing the overhanging sidewalk branches, rated as requiring routine trimming, not removal, and stating explicitly that removal was not indicated by any structural health or safety criteria observed during on-site assessment. I read it 3 times, just to be sure I wasn't imagining how good it was. Then I called Renee at the management office and asked for the next board meeting's agenda to include exactly 1 item: a public reading of an independent certified arborist report and a direct question for Diane Whitfield in front of every homeowner who'd received her email. Because if she wanted to make this public, I was going to make sure the entire neighborhood watched her get proven wrong. The clubhouse was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Word had spread not just about the tree, but about Diane's email. People wanted to see how this would play out. I brought 3 things with me: the certified arborist report, a printed copy of Section 14.3, and a highlighted printout of the HOA's own governing documents, page 9, footnote 3, naming the ISA as the required standard for any structural or safety-based tree determination. Diane opened the meeting like nothing had happened: budget updates, landscaping contract renewal. Then she reached the agenda item Renee had added, and her expression changed just slightly, just enough that I saw it. Next, she said, we have a resident request regarding the Coleman property tree violation. I stood up before she could steer the conversation anywhere else. I had the tree assessed, I said, holding up the report, by a certified arborist using the exact credentialing standard listed in our own bylaws, section 14, page 9, footnote 3. Would you like me to read the findings? Diane's smile was thinner now. This is a board matter, not, you made it a matter for 62 households, I said, so I think they deserve to hear the results. A few people actually applauded. Diane's face went red. I read from the report the risk rating, the explicit finding that removal wasn't warranted, the section addressing the sidewalk clearance which called for trimming, not removal, at an estimated cost of $180. Not $200 a week, not a lien. $180 one time for a professional trim. This tree, I said, was never a hazard. It was an opinion you decided to enforce as a fact, using a section of our bylaws that requires exactly this kind of professional assessment, an assessment you never obtained before issuing a violation, a fine, or a lien threat. Diane tried to recover. The board retains discretion in matters of, the board's own document says otherwise, I said, and held up the highlighted page for the room to see. It's right here, in writing, with your signature on the cover page as board president when it was adopted 2 years ago. The room had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it. A man near the back, I'd later learn it was Mr. Henderson, the maple tree family, stood up. I got the same violation letter, same wording, no inspection. Are you telling me she's been doing this to all of us? Another voice from the couple on Cedarwood Court. She told us our pine tree was a hazard too. We paid to have it removed in January. The board secretary, a quiet man named Philip who rarely spoke at meetings, cleared his throat. How many violation letters have been issued under Section 14? 3 in the last 6 months, Diane. Diane didn't answer. She gathered her folder, said the meeting would reconvene at a later date to discuss procedure, and left through the side door before anyone could stop her. Philip looked at me, then at the rest of the board. I think, he said slowly, we need an emergency session. Without Diane running it. I sat back down and Mark squeezed my hand under the table. For the first time in 6 weeks, I let myself believe this might actually be over, and that Diane's clipboard had just written the last violation it was ever going to write. The emergency board session happened 9 days later. I wasn't in the room for most of it, but Philip called me that evening with the outcome. The board had pulled violation records going back 18 months. 11 households had received tree removal violations under Section 14. 3. Of those 11, only 2 had ever received a professional inspection, and both had been arranged by the homeowners themselves at their own expense, exactly like I had. Diane had never once ordered or paid for a certified assessment before issuing a violation. Not once. 4 families, including the couple on Cedarwood Court, had already removed healthy, mature trees rather than fight the fines. One of those trees, Philip told me, was over 60 years old. The board voted 5-1 to formally reverse our violation, waive the $1,400 fine in full, and open a review of every tree violation issued in the past 2 years. Diane cast the only vote against her own removal from the tree committee oversight role she'd assigned herself. 3 weeks later, facing a petition signed by 41 households calling for a recall vote, she resigned from the HOA board entirely, citing personal reasons in an email that this time she did copy to everyone. The Hendersons got their maple violation reversed too. The board sent a formal letter of apology to the couple on Cedarwood Court, though nobody could undo a 60-year-old pine tree that no longer existed. That part still makes me quietly furious, if I'm honest. Some of what she took can't be given back, no matter how many meetings get held afterward. Our oak tree got its sidewalk branches trimmed by a licensed crew in June. It's still standing in our front yard right now, the same tire swing hanging from the same low branch, the same acorns dropping every fall for our boys to collect in mason jars. Tom, the arborist, still sends us a card every spring, half joking that our oak made him a minor celebrity in the neighborhood group chat. I think about that first morning a lot, Diane standing on my lawn with her phone raised. So certain, so sure that a clipboard and a confident tone were all the authority she'd ever need. She wasn't wrong that people usually fold when someone official-sounding tells them they're breaking a rule. Most of us are raised to trust the person holding the paperwork, but paperwork isn't proof. Authority isn't accuracy. And the moment I stopped assuming Diane knew what she was talking about and started asking her to prove it, the entire thing fell apart. Not because I yelled louder, not because I hired the meanest lawyer in town, but because I got one qualified person to look at the actual facts and write them down. Mark still teases me about it sometimes, usually when the boys are out back on that tire swing, laughing loud enough to hear from the kitchen. You do know, he says, you started a whole recall election over a tree. And I did. But it was never really about the tree. It was about a system built to protect a neighborhood getting quietly bent into a tool for one person's opinions, and about what happens the first time somebody finally says no, prove it. If you've ever gotten one of those letters, the ones written to sound bigger than they actually are, I hope this reminds you to ask the one question that changes everything. Says who? Ask for the credentials. Ask for the document. Ask for the proof behind the threat, because half the time there isn't one. If this story hit home for you, or if you've got your own HOA horror story sitting in your back pocket, drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of yours are wilder than mine. And if you want more of these, sticking around and subscribing means a lot more than you'd think. It's the only reason I get to keep telling them.